We approached this a slightly different way than a lot of entrepreneurs did. So we were very obsessed with building a profitable company quickly. And the reason behind that was we said, hey, if you build a profitable company, you have unlimited options forever. So versus if if you're a super innovative company, then you have to go raise money, then you have to, it might not work. So we actually tried to find a business with a lower risk profile, which I think is a really underappreciated thing in entrepreneurship, which is there's a lot of guys on Twitter who talk about find people who are doing services businesses, with a fax machine and just go replicate what they're doing. We didn't quite do that, but we did a version of that, which was we wanted something that would make us money quickly. We'd also learn from it and it would be kind of a platform. And so someone said, go look at digital marketing and online advertising.
Welcome to Entrepreneur's Handbook Podcast, where we share inspiring startup stories with practical takeaways for you, the listener. Today we have with us Jessie Pujji, who is a serial entrepreneur and the founder of GatewayX and Kahani, amongst other startups. He's also a huge personality on Twitter with over 150,000 followers. It's great to have you here, Jessie.
Yeah, I'm so excited to be here, Amr. Thanks for having me on.
So you've got a really interesting background. You've done so many different things. Can you tell us, where did this all start from? What made you start your first company and become an entrepreneur?
Yeah, I think it chose me versus I chose it. I was born and raised in St. Louis. My dad was an immigrant, came over from India when he was 17. And pretty much since I was born, he was an entrepreneur. And so I was helping him with whatever odd jobs or things came up. And I was always what I looked at and what I saw. And I was the kid who had a lemonade stand at age 7, had a sell popcorn tins door to door at age 9 or 10, had a snow shoveling business at age 12. We cornered the Indian wedding market for DJing in high school. And when we were 15, there was not that many in the Midwest. So we'd get the CDs from London and Toronto and be able to kind of DJ the weddings. And then in college had a t-shirt business. So honestly, since I can remember, entrepreneurship has just been a part of my DNA and who I am.
But initially you went into the corporate world, right? You started working, was it McKinsey you worked for a while? And then you then spun up Ampush, I think, first, right? What was that journey like there?
Yeah. I mean, it's funny. When people look at my resume, they go, "Oh, well, you did these white shoe firms, and that seems very different than entrepreneurship." And I always tell people it was more of a detour for me. I think I went to college. I went to Penn. I went to Wharton, which is obviously a great college. And I came in going, I'm going to be an entrepreneur. And then I learned all these things. I didn't know much about Wall Street. I didn't know much about management consulting. And, I'm a curious person. And they seemed like, everyone's like, these are the best firms in the world. You have to go work with them. And so, I managed to get jobs at them, which was not easy. And I thought it would be silly not to go explore them and learn from them. And I would say I loved my experience, both in consulting and on Wall Street. But I also felt like a fish out of water. They felt like not long-term things for me. And I tell young people always, one of the best things I learned, I think it helped me really a lot as a young person, was I would just try to find the senior most person in the company. So at McKinsey, you have these partners. And at that time, obviously it was many years ago before COVID, they're on 4 airplanes a week. They're jumping around to different projects. They have a lot of influence, but they're not necessarily making the decisions or doing things. And nothing wrong with that. I just looked at it and said, oh, that's not what I want to be one day when I grow up. And so I did the same thing when I was on Wall Street, and so to me, that's always the method. You look far ahead in terms of who's the senior person, what are they doing? And is that what you want to do one day? And if yes, stick with it and stay there. And if no, then look for something different.
And what do you think consulting taught you that helped you become a better entrepreneur? What did you learn from that system?
The biggest one I'd say is just the high bar and rigor for talent. Just if there was anything we did that was smart about getting Ampush off the ground, was we saw and learned how these top firms recruited and the level and the types of interviews. And we said, okay, we're going to do that when we look for people. And I think that just helped us get an amazing amount of talent. And once you have 10 really awesome people, like they go find another 10 awesome people. And the next thing you know, the whole company has a really high bar for culture and talent. And so I'd say that's probably the number one thing. I think, there's a certain structured thinking that you learn as a consultant. I mean, you look at a revenue P&L, or you look at a problem or something, a project or business, and you learn how to break it down into smaller parts and then solve it. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs get in, you start doing all these things, and then kind of a mess comes up and you don't know what to do with it. I felt very able-bodied when it came to, there's a problem. Okay, I know how to break it down into small pieces. I think that, and then the third one, just there's a bunch, but I think the third one is, you know, jokingly, I'll say PowerPoint, but really what they taught was like persuasive communication, right? So how do you put something in front of someone that's a compelling narrative? How do you make sure you have the right data supporting the right facts and points of view to put something together that's persuasive and compelling? And I think like that's a lot of what building a business is persuading investors, persuading employees to come join you, persuading customers to take a shot on you. And so I think that a lot was I think I already knew a bit of it, but it was very much honed in that environment.
Yeah, and I think one of the important things as well, if you become an employee straight after university, you get paid to learn for a while. So like you said, you're learning all these things that are going to then help become a better entrepreneur, the structured thinking, the better communication. And if you start straight out of university without any income, without any savings to try and start your own business, then you've got to learn all those lessons at the same time as trying to make money, which is obviously a very tough thing. And sometimes it gets over glorified by some people that, yeah, just go drop out of university and do it straight away. But then where's your, like, you've got you're not got anybody teaching you ahead of you unless you're very lucky with mentors. And with Ampush itself, like, was that started on the side of while you were working, or did you quit the job, then start Ampush? How did that transition work?
We quit and started, I think we had tried side hustles even in college. We were like, oh, we were that kid that was like, we're going to go straight out of college. And I don't think we understood what it really took and in terms of commitment and conviction. And then while working at these jobs, we also tried a couple side hustles. It just never worked for me because I'm pretty committed and I'm pretty focused when I'm doing something. And so I could never find, if whatever I was doing, I wanted to be focused on that. I didn't find the time to do the side hustle. I don't think there's anything wrong with side hustles. It's just, it wasn't my style or what worked for me. I then, got to, it was the end of the financial crisis. So late 2009, actually my co-founder, Nick, he woke up one morning, he was in India with Morgan Stanley at the time, and he was about to join a hedge fund. And I got a news message that said, it was called Blue Wave. Blue Wave has blown up during the financial crisis, down 40%, shutting its doors. That was where he was supposed to go work the next month. So I send him this message. I'm like, dude, this, you're not going to work there anymore. And next thing you know, he's like, okay, well, I don't think I'm going to look for another job. And I was like, oh, what does that mean? He's like, I don't know. Let's jump on. Let's go do the journey. And so by the end of the year, I was like, all right, me too. And then Chris, our third co-founder, by the way, we were all freshman roommates. So we had been like best friends for a really long time, knew each other really well. We said, okay. And we moved to California on a dime in 2010 and started Ampush. And so it was sort of focused from the get-go.
And how was it building Ampush with your best friends at the same time as the financial crisis? Because obviously it would have been very stressful, and to have your friends there, sometimes it works well because you can support each other. But then it's also hard because you've got to have that separation between the business side of things and the personal side. Yeah,
it's interesting. There's a few pieces to it. I'd say one is, I always joke, like they were like my professional friends, like I have like knuckleheads that I grew up with that I probably would never start a business with that are also very close friends. But then these guys were I met them as freshmen at Wharton. They're really smart. Obviously, we had done all these school projects and we'd lived together. Like you kind of knew all the pieces of each other and you had a lot of trust because you knew they were competent. You knew they were reliable. I'd stayed up till 4 a.m. working on problem sets with them. So in many ways, they were a certain type of friend, I think. And we all looked at each other that way, that we were there to do business together in some sense. And I think that was part of what made it successful. I think we also, we just did our best in terms of like open communication. We always had contracts amongst us. What we didn't do is we weren't, oh yeah, we'll figure it out down the road. We said, no, you know what? In order to be good friends, let's get a contract. Let's make sure we have vesting schedules. Let's make sure the equity is clear. Like there was never anything unclear between the three of us. And we all made it kind of our best to kind of be candid around everything that had to do with the business. So, the financial crisis part of it's a good question. We didn't think that much about it. One thing we did was we said we had committed 2+ years of our lives to these big firms. Let's give 2 years of our lives to ourselves. And so we actually had a joke, and it was true. We said, no one's allowed to take the GMAT for 2 years. There's no talk of business school. We are going to go hard on this for 2 full years. And then if at that point it's not working out, we'll talk about alternatives. And that was actually really, really important because the first year was so challenging because we had no idea what we were doing. And I think if we had not had that kind of commitment, we wouldn't have stuck with it.
How did you get out of that then? So with the difficulty at the beginning and you had the commitment to it, but where did you get your first customers from? How did you find that product market fit?
Yeah, we approached this a slightly different way than a lot of entrepreneurs did. So we were very obsessed with building a profitable company quickly. And the reason behind that was we said, hey, if you build a profitable company, you have unlimited options forever. So versus if if you're a super innovative company, then you have to go raise money, then you have to, it might not work. So we actually tried to find a business with a lower risk profile, which I think is a really underappreciated thing in entrepreneurship, which is there's a lot of guys on Twitter who talk about find people who are doing services businesses, with a fax machine and just go replicate what they're doing. We didn't quite do that, but we did a version of that, which was we wanted something that would make us money quickly. We'd also learn from it and it would be kind of a platform. And so someone said, go look at digital marketing and online advertising. And there was, we said, okay, we did that. We said, well, we don't know anyone. We have no relationships. We know nothing. Okay, well, there's this type of marketing called performance marketing. And that you don't need a relationship. They'll just pay you for every successful lead or successful customer you drive for them. We go, okay. And if you can cost you $25 on Google to buy the AdWords and get them to convert, and you can sell it for 50 because that's what the customer's worth to them, you make 25. And we said, and super naive, we said, oh, sounds great. We can figure that out. And we had spreadsheets and stuff that told us all we needed was a conversion rate of 3 or 4%. Okay, we'll go figure this out. No problem. And then, of course, reality, met us where we said, oh, my God, we don't know how to run an AdWords campaign. We don't know how to set up a website. And so we really went through this arduous process, just kind of cutting our teeth and learning how to do it. And early on, we lost a lot of our own money and had no idea what we were doing. And we went into these moments where we just had to call people and say, help us figure this out. And eventually, I think we really just copied a competitor's landing page and a competitor's keywords. And it started to make a small margin, like a 5 or 10% margin. We got our customers, by the way, you asked that, we're going to a conference. But in performance marketing, it's easy to get customers. They'll give you a test budget. If it works, they'll keep working with you. If it doesn't, they won't. But we started to kind of get that revenue and said, okay, we can grow this. And our big break probably came about a year in when Facebook had just launched the first version of their self-serve ad platform. We were scraping by on Google ads because they were pretty competitive. And no one had ever run these ads on Facebook. And we ran some of the first, I built the first ad. I can remember it exactly to this day. And what was a 5% margin on Google was an 80% margin on Facebook. And so as soon as that happened, we were like, oh my God, we've figured something out. And then sort of, the rest is history.
Yeah. And you were there, it's been over 10 years now since Ambush was founded. And throughout that journey, I guess your role was kept adapting as well. And how have you found that from being those 3 friends starting a business to then growing and getting more employees and growing the revenue to greater margins as well? How has that journey been for you? And what did you start to enjoy more and realize maybe you're better suited to?
Yeah, I got the most excitement, and I continue to get the most excitement when it's helping myself and the team grow personally, actually become more self-aware, more empathetic, better with feedback, better with skills. And I think I like it the least when it's it's all just, we got to go get revenue in dollars. And I'd say through the journey, and early on, I put a ton of pressure on myself to get those numbers and then put a ton of pressure on the team. And it frankly, there was a time where we thought it was a great culture, but it really wasn't. And even you can go to this day and look at Glassdoor, and there's some people that wrote some really mean things about me. But honestly, in retrospect, they didn't have to say it that way. But there was a lot of truth to what they were saying. And I think for me, as I started to look at it, a little bit more hey, this is an evergreen journey where I'm going to learn a ton. I continue as I evolved, and the business could evolve. If I wasn't evolving, the business didn't evolve. But I'd say there's always a handful of phases, right? There's that 0 to 10 employee phase where it's super casual. Nobody knows anything. People do 10 different jobs. Then I think once you get beyond that, kind of the 10 to 30, you don't need org structures and stuff, but you generally have groupings and people are talking and communicating, and when you get to 50 plus, it's no, there's teams and departments and leaders. And then I think you get to over 100 and it's really executives and executives are running each part of the business. And I think each has its own positive, distinct phase to it that I think has a lot of great pieces to it. But ultimately, these things, the only thing I remember from the journeys, this many years through it is the people. And I mean that like both our customers, the people who worked at our customers, I stay in touch with them, getting coffee all the time with them, people who worked for me and with me. It's the only thing you actually remember.
Yeah, I really like that you're open about not being the best boss in the past, because I think sometimes people kind of gloss over that, right? There is a learning experience there. And you did start the company when you were fairly young, so you might have had some experience in the corporate world and how management worked there. But to try to apply that to a startup is very difficult. And it's interesting as well, even by being open about the Glassdoor reviews, because sometimes people get to a certain level of success and they kind of then start believing that everything they did on that journey was correct. And it's good to know, like, yes, you did make some mistakes and now you're a better person because of it and hopefully a better manager. What things did you change about your management style over those years to adapt to that feedback?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is kind of the journey of self-awareness is a long one and one that's sort of evergreen. I think I would have described myself as self-aware in 2015 or 16. And then I started working with a coach and I was like, oh, there's levels to this, right? So when I say self-aware, I'd say like, like if something happened a week or two later, I'd reflect on it and kind of go, yeah, maybe I wasn't, being super nice in that conversation, or I was feeling stressed or something. And I never really yelled at people, but critical or negative. And as I started doing more of this work with a coach, I realized like, you can actually be self-aware in the moment. And you can actually walk into a meeting and go, I'm actually feeling a little nervous. And you can just share that with your team. Hey guys, I'm feeling a little nervous. And they go, oh, Jess, you're feeling nervous. Like, here's a hug, And instead of walking in, not knowing you're feeling nervous and looking at numbers that you're not happy about and kind of like, okay, why aren't we doing this? Let's do this instead, guys. And so I think just kind of being hyper reactive, because I didn't know where I was mentally or sort of emotionally, to then being able to sense those things better inside of me, and then kind of choose how I showed up in those moments, and also be more candid. It's not like you can be candid with your team if you yourself are not able to identify how you're feeling. So that's been a big journey of kind of developing that in the moment self-awareness, I would call it. I think there's a lot of pieces to it, which we could talk about, but I think the other one is also figuring out what was driving me. I think early on, I used fear a lot as a motivator for myself, and then sort of that trickles down, obviously. But then over time, I think like I've started to use more, joy as a motivator, or genius as a motivator, like things I want to do, or excitement, like let's run excitedly to something, let's not run away and, be afraid of something. And I think that's been a big difference in the way, and it shows up in every minute, every meeting, every conversation.
Yeah, I completely agree with both things you said there. And so one of the things that happened to me, I don't think I mentioned the podcast so far, but a couple months ago, my dad passed away. And so much of what I do is communication based. So do I pretend to be happy to everybody I talk to when I'm trying to organize interviews and talking to people who are massively successful, right? And I could try to present myself as like infallible, or I don't feel emotions, or not mention it. But it's like at the end of that, I'm a different person now than I was a few months ago because of what happened. And it's going to make me make some mistakes. I'm going to be a little bit less confident. And by telling people what happened, like I said, then people will react to that, right? We're all human at the end of the day. People understand that's something tough to have gone through. And I cancelled all my clients. I did lots of different things to adjust to that. And it's like I said, I always had this idea of being self-aware and telling people how I felt. But it's almost easier to do it in some ways when it's not a huge range. Whereas when this kind of hit me, it's like, okay, if I'm going to live what I'm preaching, then I've got to tell people it's just happened. And it's been overwhelmingly positive. And I guess you found the same in terms of your team will support you. You don't have to try to pretend to be strong all the time. And it's okay to sometimes feel a bit more weaker, or you need a bit of support.
Yeah, when people aren't treating you like a human being, it's sometimes because you have not been human with them a lot of times. And I tell that to a lot of leaders. It's like, nobody knows what it's like to be a CEO and a founder. It's impossible to understand until you're going through it. So if you tell people, this is what my calendar looks like, so the reason I want you to have a really buttoned up meeting is not because I'm like a jerk. It's because I got so much going on that I could use your help. And I started using phrases like that. Could you help? I would love your help telling me the 3 most important things you want to get from me so that I can help you through those things and we can get done with it. Because, and so I think there's a big part of that, being vulnerable, humanizing yourself. I think that's a huge piece of it. And, the other thing that I tell a lot of founders, and I tell my son this too, because he's tough on himself, like, one of the best baseball players ever just retired for the St. Louis Cardinals, Albert Pujols. I think he's number 5 overall in the history of baseball. His batting average is 296 or something, 298, which means out of 1,000 times he would get a hit 296. So we talk about more than 50% hit rate. No. In baseball, to be one of the best ever, you have to have 30% of the time successes. And I think in entrepreneurship, it might be even lower. Like if you get a couple things really right, so you can make a lot of mistakes, and I think it's important to embrace that and get really comfortable and actually enjoy making the mistakes.
Yeah, and for the people listening now who maybe are working corporate jobs where they've got the manager or the leader, and I remember for myself, right, you just get really frustrated about how people are managing you and why do they treat you like this and why do they treat you like that? And then being on the other side of things, you realize, oh, that's like actually being the leader is actually really hard. And by being open with people, then they actually understand it. It kind of gets rid of some of that tension and frustration, right? Because if somebody you're managing is just like, oh, why is he always like this with me? Then they start making up, they start filling in the gaps themselves because you haven't been open with them. And by doing that open communication, like, hey, look, got personal problems at the moment. I'm not fully there. Anything you can do to help me, that'd be amazing. People relate to that, and they appreciate you being open and honest with them as well. And like in the last few years, you've obviously branched out a bit more, right? So you were mainly focused on Ampush. Can you tell us about some of the stuff you've been up to in the last couple of years?
Yeah. So, as I started reflecting on what really motivated me and got me excited, I realized I loved that early stage of building, kind of coming up with an idea, putting the pieces together to get it into the world. And it's like, to me, there's just no cooler feeling than that. I had one day something was an idea, the next day it's a thing, and I always describe it as like, it's almost like a little dust in space, and then it spins a little bit, and then a little more dust comes. The next thing you know, it's a planet, right? And it's got an orbit, and it's got gravitational pull, and I just love it, And I also love coaching and teaching people. I love kind of spotting opportunities, and so somebody put me on a few years ago to kind of the venture studio model, which is where you have a company and you basically make other companies. So you come up with your own ideas, you fund them, you test other stuff, and then eventually you spin them out. And so, I started GatewayX, which is a venture studio, last January, and we've launched 3 businesses out of it. The first one is called Growth Assistant, and the kind of the pitch there, the bet there is, just like 20 years ago, software engineering, there was a ton of demand for talent and not enough supply, and then offshoring became a huge category. We think the same thing's going to happen in digital marketing. And based on kind of the success to date, we launched 18 months ago. We already have 250 people in the Philippines and close to 100 customers. Like we think we made a good bet. So that one's exciting. We launched a brand called Unbloat. We met with a bunch of doctors and talked about different issues that people face, and there's a bunch of candidates that we then researched and tried to understand better. And bloating was an interesting one because it's searched as often as erectile dysfunction. And yet there's no solution. We couldn't find a solution on the market for it. And so we went and worked with some doctors and developed one, and it works really well. And that business has a few thousand subscribers already. And then most recently, we launched a software business called Kahani. The bet there is, we believe that, websites are boring and old. E-commerce websites are boring and old. They look exactly the same as they did 10 years ago. They're basically a shrunken down desktop site that used to be from a catalog. And why don't they look and feel more like the most engaging apps, which is like TikTok and Instagram? So we basically built tools that allow a brand to kind of have that vertical media, tap, swipe, all the functionality. And the first product kind of leverages that stories. It's a very familiar format that everyone knows. So we started with it to say, okay, let's get this on a bunch of different e-com merchant sites, and we're seeing amazing lift in engagement, conversion, kind of all the metrics that you could imagine are super positive when e-commerce sites leverage the tool. So those are the 3 we've launched out of it. And we got our hands full right now, but maybe in a few years we'll do some more stuff.
I think the venture studio model sounds like a great idea for anybody. Like the kind of entrepreneurs who really just love starting new things. It's like the perfect dream thing to end up in, right? Once you've built a business, you've got the kind of level of success that you can then spin off a studio for yourself. And how do you manage your time in that? Because obviously you're working on different projects at the same time. How are you able to juggle that effectively?
Yeah. I mean, you really have to. I think the most important thing far and away is talent and partnership. You got to find great people and partner well with them. Because because almost from the first minute, you can't do it alone. And so, each of the businesses, they'll have a person who's running the day to day. And I think it's like very clear. Yeah, again, great people, great at partnering, great at delegating, and being really clear about what you will and won't do, which I'm still learning how to. I'm making it sound like I know what I'm doing, but I don't. and it's a learning curve for sure.
How do you find these people to partner with? Like, what criteria do you use, or how are you able to judge them effectively so that you know that these relationships work out in the long term?
Yeah, I mean, look, they don't always work out. I think that's the first thing, right? Back to making mistakes. Like I've made hiring mistakes for these businesses, and had to part ways with people and stuff. I think networking, getting to know people, Twitter helps a lot. Every in any way you can, right? I think like Adrienne was my best friend since 7th grade, so she's unique. And then one of the GMs kind of comes from Twitter, right? And like met me as like, hey, we should do this. So it's all over the place in terms of where they're coming from. I think the criteria is, I always, one of my favorite entrepreneurial kind of criteria is we call it like entrepreneurial rigor. So sort of, there's the rigorous, which is your analytical, your quantitative, you're thoughtful and reflective. And then there's entrepreneurial, which is like you're bold and resourceful. And we actually think the best people cross over those two. So that's kind of the criteria I tend to look for. And then I think the other thing is temperamentally and sort of what gets the person excited being complementary to me. I'm out there, I'm marketing and sales, I'm talking and external facing. I can run project management and carry a clipboard, but I don't love it. And so if those people can do those things, that tends to be a great fit in terms of how to partner.
And like over the years, the different businesses you've run, and have you picked up a almost playbook in a way? So the new companies you launch, where you've got a certain model of like, you want to make sure that these certain things are in place early on because of the mistakes you've learned in the past, other than the people, like what else are the models you use?
What I'll say is I think there are some of those. A lot of it is actually back to this kind of the self-awareness and sort of like being intentional and being present in the moment and making a right decision. You have to be a little bit careful with playbooks, especially when you're doing entrepreneurial things, because unless you're starting the same business over and over. So if it was an e-commerce business that has subscription and supplements, okay, fine, the playbook might work. We've done a lot of things that get it. But if we're going to start an apparel business next, there's some parts that will carry over, and there's other parts that you really have to create the space to think freely on and openly, because the answer is going to be different. And if you apply the playbook, you won't work. So the balance is actually finding what is consistent. So things that can be consistent are like how to run great meetings, how to hire talented people. How do you think about content and how content gets used? Even that's kind of different depending on if it's B2C or B2B. So there's certain things that are consistent, and there's other things that you actually have to consistently be inconsistent, right? So you have to sit there and go, oh no, we don't know the answer to this, and we shouldn't pretend like we do. Let's go try some stuff and figure out what the answer might be.
You mentioned content there as well, and obviously on Twitter you've grown a huge audience, and you've done that over time. And I think you've mentioned like how much you enjoy that side of things as well. Like, what about Twitter, like, do you think has meant that you found a good audience and been able to connect with so many people who are like-minded with you?
I think for me, it's been one of these things where I think especially during COVID, you weren't going to conferences, you weren't out and about. And I am definitely an extrovert. My wife is an introvert. We'll come home from the same event and I will be like, let's watch a movie and let's hang out. And like, she'll be like, oh my God, I have to go to bed. Right. Like, so I'm very much an extrovert. And I think there wasn't a lot of outlets for that during COVID. And I think Twitter was kind of that, if you could get out there and talk about it. And, you and I have talked for 30, 40 minutes now. Like I am who you see, there's no other Jessie here. And even on Twitter, that's kind of why I'm like, yeah, here's a crazy story about how I screwed something up. Or here's another cool story about when I had a really cool opportunity and a really positive thing happened. Here's a tips, leadership tips that I use. Then I actually started like some of my favorite stories personally are when you hear about some like $10 billion bootstrap company in Wisconsin or something like that. And I was like, oh yeah, I love these stories. Like I'm going to write one. And that one, it just went, through the roof. And so then I was like, oh, let me write more of that. And it became super fun because like, here I am actually, either I knew the stories already because I talked to people about things, or it was a new story for me. I was like, wow, this is such a cool, inspiring story. And so I was kind of just myself but in obviously an augmented way. And that led to a lot of positive, and then people start messaging you you make friends from it. So yeah, it's been a lot of fun.
I think one of the important things there as well is that you've been writing about things that are interesting to you, rather than sometimes the other thing people do is they try to seek out what they think people want to hear. Whereas by doing something you're already interested in, that passion comes through it. Like, I think stories are always better told by somebody who's curious about the actual story than somebody who's simply doing, oh, this is going to do well, so I'm going to go and research that. And that's one of the problems I think at social media at the moment, where some of the advice is around that area. And like, obviously, with my own following on Medium and places like that, it's me writing about things I care about and trying to make it accessible to other people. And that's what people connect with. Whereas you can grow a following quite quickly by being inauthentic or something like that. But it doesn't work out for you in the end, because what's the point? Like, what are you gaining from that?
Yeah, you want to attract, like, you're going to attract what you put out in some sense. And don't get me wrong. Look, I think it's important to say, I make sure that the first tweet is really, really clickbaity, you know, and then I make sure that, like, I tell people to follow me at the end of the tweet, and the tactics are still the tactics. So, and I have friends of mine who make sure that my tweets are they're commenting and stuff. So it's never black and white, right? I think there's parts of it that are manufactured, of course. But the core of it is very much authentic to what interests me and what's exciting for me.
Yeah. And that's the thing. It's like, you can do both, right? You can use the tactics and use the hook, because I don't know about you, but even that is fun for me, right? It's to work out, like, how can I make it open line as effective as possible?
Totally.
And then you're re-guessing it, like, oh, okay, maybe if I do it this way instead. And I think to do well in any social platform, you've got to enjoy that bit of it. It can't be the chore of, like, oh, how do I write this in an effective way? It's like, oh, how do I get to do, like, it's something you get to do because you're excited about it.
Good hook is authentic to me. Like, if you're sitting with me at dinner, the first sentence out of my mouth is probably going to be a good hook. I don't even mean to do it. It's just the way I talk, right? It's like, I have a one-liner that's everyone's going to go, what? What's this guy talking? And so, yeah, totally.
And like, in the future now, what you're working on that's really exciting for you. So obviously you've got GatewayX, and it's going to set up more companies. But is there anything in the near term where people listening right now should be like keeping an eye out for what you're building?
I think Kahani, I mean, I think that's the biggest bet we have. We actually raised money for it, which is the first time I'd ever done that. I think in my wildest dreams, it has a chance to become on every e-com website, potentially to replace something like Shopify, or at least become a part of that platform in a sense that everyone goes, I want vertical media, vertical video, tapping, swiping. I want to use an e-com website the way I use social platforms or Tinder. I want to make it that native. And we think, based on the numbers and results we're seeing, like, it has a lot of legs to it. So yeah, Kahani, especially if you're an e-commerce player, give us a call. Check us out, kahaniapp.com.
Yeah, and you mentioned there about raising capital for it as well, because I know, like, in a lot of your content, you talk about bootstrapping. And what do you think is the best time when people listening right now who might be torn between, should I try to go to venture scale, or should I try to do bootstrapping? What was behind those decisions for you with your different companies? Why is Kahani, did you go for funding, and the other ones you didn't?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I answer the question in two ways, right? I think most of the time when I have this conversation with entrepreneurs, they're really trying to get the answer right. And I have to say, the first thing I would say is there is not a right answer to this question. And you can just see someone, if they agree, if they believe it, they go, you're right. There's not, And so the first thing is just, what do you want? You want to build, like, VCs are really great at building businesses. They have platforms. I'm already learning, oh, wow, they send me candidates. Like, they know how to build big businesses. They know how to get you the resources. They're behind you. You have a big idea. And typically what it leads to is an exit, or, and you're at some point probably going to have lots of people on a board that you're running and whatever. Like, that's the normal path, unless you're Zuckerberg or something, right? Like, you'll own 10 to 20% of the company. You'll have a board. And that's a certain type of running a business that ends up occurring usually when you raise venture. The flip of that, the sort of bootstrap route is, like, you're usually always in control and the boss, and you get to call the shots, and that has pros and cons too. Like, sometimes you don't go as big as you could have, or you'll miss certain things, and there's no right answer though. It's like, what's your future path? Do you want to run the business for a long time and do it your way? Do you want to, like, run it really fast and hard and sell it and probably lose control at some point? Like, that's just a decision you have to make. That's kind of the sort of personal side of the equation. The sort of more academic, or to answer your question about our businesses, is like, I really looked at what we were building, how big I thought it could be, what it needed to be successful. And I capitalized, actually all three of them are capitalized very differently. Growth Assistant was basically bootstrap. We put a little, like, $50K in the beginning, but really was profitable from the first month or two. Unblow, we've leveraged kind of debt financing, a little bit of equity financing, or like a little bit of my cash, and then use debt to basically fund the media buying and inventory. But that's kind of the way we've done it. And we don't think it'll be a venture scale business, but we think it'll be a big and successful business. And then Kahani, product has to be awesome. We want resources to hire engineers. Sales cycles take longer. They're like, but we think it could be way bigger. And so each of them are just very different in terms of what the game we're playing and how we think it should be capitalized.
So it's been great to talk to you today. Where should people listening want to find out more about you, more about your businesses? What's the places they should go to visit?
Yeah. My Twitter is twitter.com/JSPujji, Pujji. And then I have a website that really needs a facelift. If anybody wants to help me, that's gateway.xyz. It's not a pretty website, but there's plenty of information there.
Perfect. Thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Amr.